Hello, everyone. I wanted to start with a question. I think we've got probably 50 people in this room. Which one of us plays games here? How many of us? Okay, about 50%. Did any of us play RuneScape as kids? We've got some RuneScape players. I wanted to start with a story, which was when I was 15 years old, I shared a RuneScape account with my brother and my co-founder, James. And one day I took all of his dragon armor into the wilderness, lost it all, and the next day I was so distraught about his reaction that I decided to go onto an online gold farming website to buy some gold for real money and get all his armor back. I did this, James was happy, and then 2 days later, RuneScape banned the account for real-world trading. A year later, Jagex rolled out first-party support for real-world trading, where you could simply buy in-game gold. So I experienced from a pretty young age the power and also the threats that centralized economies can have when players are putting real time and effort in. And now, 12 years later, one of the most invested in tech categories in the world is Web3 gaming, which is the idea that you can take assets inside of video games and make them truly tradable for real money that people can have empowered ownership over. So how did we get here? I wanted to start with a bit of a story, which was back in 2017. We were building some trading bots on Ethereum, and we saw the first ever NFT come out with the idea of a CryptoPunk. Probably everyone in this room has heard of a CryptoPunk. And the reason that this was significant was we had been in the crypto space since 2014, but we didn't know what would be the first mainstream application outside of payments, which I would argue today is still the case. There is really no mainstream application of Web3 today outside of payments. And it is very clear that that category was going to be NFTs, and in particular, gaming. The reason was very simple. Gamers at that point spent $80 billion US every single year on in-game items. This was not the box set of Call of Duty. It wasn't the ability to play a game. It was literally the coins in Candy Crush, the skins in Fortnite, the in-game items you use in World of Warcraft. And gamers earned precisely $0 of these. At best, you had third-party marketplaces like Steam facilitating trading for Counter-Strike Go, where with impunity, they shut down trading to a maximum of once per week, way back in 2018. And Opskins, a $300 million third-party marketplace, went belly up. Billions of dollars of player funds and hundreds of millions of player hours went to zero because of someone wanting to change a line in a server code around what you could and couldn't own. And so when the first ever primitive of an NFT came out with the CryptoPunk, it was pretty obvious that this would transform how people owned digital objects forever. And so we started by building. We built it, I don't know if anyone in this room has played it, but it was a proof of concept game called Etherbots. All of the logic was on-chain, it was completely decentralized, and it was completely impossible to use from both a user experience and a gas perspective. You can play it now, it'll cost you a few $100s in gas fees. I don't recommend it, but it was very simple. It was the first multiplayer game ever released on the blockchain. It had battling. You could win real NFTs by battling robots that were composable of 4 different NFTs. And it went viral. It made a few $1 million of revenue, and we realized 2 simple things. The first was there was real demand for owning in-game items. And the second was it was the most difficult infrastructure to build on in the world. Particularly Ethereum back then was almost impossible. And so we had a pretty simple mission. How do we usher in now $150 billion of in-game item spend, make it truly ownable, and make sure that game developers can have a great time building this stuff, players can have a great time playing this stuff, and at the end of the day, it's completely decentralized and completely secure. And that's why we made the choices we did around Ethereum. So we then decided to do the next best thing, which was to build a platform. But back then, no one knew what an NFT was, let alone what NFT gaming was. I remember pitching this to investors back in March 2018, and they literally looked at us like we were insane, 80% of the time. 20% of the time, they got it. And our thesis was very simple, which is the only reason that Steam became the default platform for trading in-game items in a sort of centralized context today is because of Counter-Strike Go and Half-Life 2. Shout out if you've ever played these games as a kid. And the reality is you need a hit game to prove people why this category is going to matter. Every single major shift in the history of the distribution of gaming has only happened because it's been catalyzed by a popular game which leveraged that new methodology of distribution to create something no one else could before. I'm sure everyone in this room remembers Farmville or Mafia Wars, created by Zynga. And the reality is, they took that game and they made it so that you could copy and clone the underlying infrastructure into 15 different skins. They had Mafia Wars skinned into a game for young women that was based in a hair salon. And the moment it was easy to build using this distribution technology, it became, overnight, the new way that games were made. We are at that inflection point for Web3 gaming. And we built this from day one back in 2018 by taking the best things about Magic the Gathering, where you could trade cards for real money in the playground, and combining it with the benefit of a Hearthstone or a digital context trading card game called Gods Unchained. And now today, Immutable has raised over $300 million. We have over 160 games building on our platform, and we've released products that help you onboard seamlessly if you're a gamer, a developer, and more. And of course, if you were at our last conference a month ago, we recently announced our partnership with Polygon, where we're pairing the best scaling protocol for games with the best platform for games to create the new default home for Web3 games. But there's three things I really want to focus today's talk on. And I want to get quite detailed around what is needed to make NFTs and Web3 mainstream. And I break it into three buckets. And I'm going to look at my notes here. The first bucket is when content. When are we actually going to get games with high-quality user experience? We hear this question all the time, and I want to tackle this head-on and talk about the timelines we're seeing from talking to gaming customers today. The second is when onboarding. How can we make it easier than ever for game developers to build? And finally, I want to talk about one of the hidden problems in NFTs today, which is liquidity fragmentation, which is the core problem or impediment that will stop this from tokenizing not just gaming, but the entire world of unique value. And there are more dollars worth of unique value in the world than there is non-unique value by a factor of 100. This is the greatest opportunity to empower people with digital ownership since the invention of e-commerce. Binance and Coinbase are fractions of what we will be able to empower customers to own and trade if we can enable liquidity for unique goods. And the prototype that will define how all of this is done will be gaming. So let's jump into the first category. When will we get games? Now, the reason we often talk about funding in the space is that fewer than 5% of games that are currently being built for Web3 are actually live today. And I wanted to give you some context, which is in the last 3 years, more than $15 billion has been invested into the category of Web3 gaming. For context, this is one of the most invested in nascent tech categories in history. It is the most invested in category of crypto, and it is all focused on how can we take in-game items and games and make them truly ownable and interoperable and open ecosystems, which we think is fantastic. And last year, we had more than $1 billion of that into Immutable's ecosystem, which is why we care so much about these leading indicators. And we suspect that 30 to 40% of these over the next year are all going to go live. So you can take that essentially 5% and multiply that by at least an order of magnitude. Now, gaming is incredibly hit-driven. We expect majority of these games to not end up being success. We are doing everything in our power to help enable this success. And our view is games should focus on one thing: building exceptional quality content that's really fun and going and acquiring a bunch of players. They shouldn't have to worry about tokenomics or making a successful Web3 gaming economy. If you want to build a mobile gacha game today, it's incredibly simple to do so. You copy Genshin Impact or one of the most popular games models, and you focus on how do we develop more fun gameplay, a better experience for end players. That's the inflection point we need this year in order to see Web3 gaming to go live. What we see personally is, I often get asked the question, how are AAA studios thinking about Web3 today? The reality is, last month, Nexon literally announced they're putting MapleStory IP on the blockchain. You have EVE Online, one of the largest secondary marketplaces for any game in history, completely committing to Web3, a game that is fundamentally concerned with how do they empower their users to truly own things. So much so that EVE Online players send a delegation of guests twice a year to the EVE Online headquarters to inspect the server code that they're changing their economy with. This is how much of a desperate need the people who truly care about player rights see, and how they see Web3 as the answer to that. Out of the top 20 AAA gaming studios in the world, more than 18 have full-time teams working on Web3 gaming. We're in a bear market. There's no longer the rush or urgency to position leadership to public markets around, hey, we're at the forefront of Web3 gaming. But there certainly is an interest in making sure that when it does pop off, they are ready. And so we're seeing literally an increase in interest despite the bear market for these kinds of companies. We have over 160 games building on Immutable today. Illuvium has done over $100 million in primary sales. It's one of the top 30 grossing games worldwide in the last year of assets post FTX. So we're seeing tremendous traction, and the most exciting thing is none of this utility is correlated to what the price of Ethereum is or what the price of Bitcoin is. It's correlated to how many people are playing the game, how fun is the game, how much do you want to trade these assets, and that's where we get really, really excited about the future of this industry. The second point I want to bring up is all the problems that are preventing fantastic games from actually being successful, even if they get everything else right. And this is one of the most important things to fix in the industry today. Even if you build literally the best mobile game or the best desktop game, your conversion is 5% compared to Web2 gaming because of wallet infrastructure. At the point you ask your users to convert into Web3, you are losing all of your customers. And our view is very simple. We should never compromise on self-custody and security. We haven't since 2017. And that's why we just released Immutable Passport, which is a seamless email onboarding self-custodial wallet, which uses a multi-sig approach to make sure that users are always protected from fraudulent behavior from games, while they can onboard literally as simply as getting a one-time code sent to their email and typing that in. Our approach to developer experience is much the same. I think the greatest flaw of blockchains today has been that everyone is trying to iterate a more sophisticated smart contract language for people to write directly onto the blockchain. The reality is, we were specialists and we struggled with writing direct Solidity on Ethereum, which is the most open source and interoperable language today. Obviously, with Immutable ZK EVM, you're going to be able to write directly in Solidity, which is fantastic for those hardcore developers who want to be building the swaps, the index funds, the smart contracts everyone else can use. But for 95% of the mainstream game developers in the world, they just want to build with APIs or even a GUI to make their economy real and to give their players rights. And that's why our approach is, no matter what underlying rollup you're using, StarkX or ZK EVM with Immutable, you should be able to build very, very simply with APIs. And the final thing I want to talk about is liquidity fragmentation. And this is a topic that is very close to the products we're building, but it's a topic that's very difficult to read about, which is, for the last 5 years, we've seen an endless rotation of new L1s crop up trying to compete with Ethereum as Ethereum killers. And every one of them has raised hundreds of millions of dollars because they have to bootstrap from scratch the liquidity of their networks. They call this the cold start problem. And liquidity fragmentation is the #1 thing preventing NFTs as a category of asset from going from being an interesting plaything to defining how we own gaming assets, to defining how we own hundreds of trillions of dollars of unique value across centralized finance, across housing, across intellectual property, and more. And that's because every single time we create a new wallet, every single time we create a new marketplace, every single time we create a new rollup, every single time we create a new NFT, we fragment liquidity. Each rollup has siloed users and funds. Each marketplace silos liquidity on their backend of orders you can match to. Each wallet spins up a new custodial instance per user per game. And all of this means you can't trade seamlessly no matter where you are on whatever rollup you're operating or whatever wallet you're using. And under the hood, Immutable is seeking to resolve all of this to create the most powerful economic rails so game developers can already today, our evidence is, double their volume by using our products like our global order book, where they can sell an asset in-game and buy it on GameStop Marketplace or Rarible or Token Trove or any third-party marketplace. So I wanted to leave you with an idea, which is the entirety of crypto's monthly active user base is roughly 30 million people. In 2 months, we have Imvu going live, which is 7 million monthly active people. One popular game has 100 million monthly active players. All that is required for this industry to go mainstream is exceptional user experience and a popular game, one popular game. And the first breakout hit will triple crypto's monthly active user base overnight. At that moment, you can either be in the narrative and you can be ready for what will really demarcate the next bull run. And I think everyone in this room is probably on board with that mission. If you're not, hopefully I've persuaded you a little bit more today. But I think we're in an incredibly exciting time. This is where real utility and real mainstream applications are being built. I highly encourage, if you want to learn more, come chat to us on Twitter or Discord, or come chat to the fantastic games and platforms building here. But thank you so much for your time, and we're very excited.